Chapter 602. Shiya's existence was something that all the creatures in this world did not need to know about. It was naturally engraved in their bones. At the moment when the attack that broke through the 12 worlds descended, Bangar, who had transformed into a beast-headed giant, had once confirmed his victory. However, what he did not expect was that before the attack that was a mixture of the power of the orcs and the giants. What greeted him was not the combination of the King Selector tribe and the giants, but the blurred feeling that was branded in the deepest part of his memory. It was not a forgery, nor was it the protection obtained by using a similar artifact. It was the power that truly belonged to Shiya. And the reason why Bangar could completely confirm this was also very simple. Gul'dan's huge body had unknowingly shed the blood-red color of the divine territory and turned into a holy white color. The shining fist was just as Luoya had said, creating the future, and was unparalleled. That was not a description, but a literal scene. The holy white light spread out with Gul'dan's attack as the center, enveloping heaven and earth. The impact that came with the light flattened the desert. Everyone on the battlefield had to bend down and try their best to resist. In the light, Gul'dan's fist completely shattered the huge body of the beast-headed giant. From the arm to the body, this ancient giant beast that was famous throughout the world turned into thousands of fragments. Bangar's divine territory also collapsed at this moment. The victory and defeat of the past have finally been decided. The next moment, a white light flashed in the sky, and the huge black figure disappeared. Boom! Bangar was defeated. This was an undeniable fact. Not only his body, but in the attack just now, his soul had dissipated. Even the black sludge that would restore the original state after the destruction of the body could not restore the existence of this soul that had disappeared. Feeling the intense pain in his body, the black-haired young man clenched his fist slightly. He turned his head to look at the giant king that was emitting the holy white light, and asked softly, "Yeah, I see." Bangar, although he was a selfish and despicable person who abandoned his own race for the so-called belief and allowed the orcs to degenerate into monsters, there was one thing that Luoya was certain of, and that was that he had gone through a long period of time, and that was the power and technology that were polished like diamonds. It was not a reluctance, but a slight regret. "Yeah, but you who defeated him is stronger." Hearing Gul'dan's praise, Luoya could not help but widen his eyes suddenly. He looked at the huge skeleton, and for a moment, he was so surprised that he was speechless. This wasn't counting the praise from the ancient gods. Roha had never received such praise before. Hearing these words, Roha couldn't help but smile. Chapter 603. Strictly speaking, the ability of prophecy wasn't a spell. Even with the power of a spell, the prophecy might not be activated after a certain ritual was completed. On the contrary, when it was activated, the caster might not have done anything at all. Therefore, strictly speaking, this was something similar to the intuition of a high-level extraordinary. However, the time it took to sense it was much longer, and the matter wasn't related to the caster. But no matter what, one thing was certain. The stronger one's strength and talent, the more likely it was for them to complete the prophecy. From this perspective, the two extremes that fought in ancient times could be said to be blessed by the heavens in this aspect. But looking at it this way, the Mother Goddess also had the same conditions, and there was no reason for her followers to not retaliate. And the result was the current situation. The sky turned from day to night in a very short period of time. The sun set, and the silver moon hung high in the sky. The sudden change in the environment had almost destroyed the common sense of the people. The people in the battle had no choice but to stop and observe the situation. In the sky above the desert, the silver mist was rapidly colliding with the floating egg of the beast god, and rapidly devouring the power of the black sphere. Facing the fog of concealment of the Mother Goddess's camp, the egg of the beast god, that was created to resist it let out a deafening roar and fought back with all its might. Remember, amidst the deafening roar of the beast, countless black sludge rushed out of the egg of the beast god and transformed into thousands of flying monsters. They covered the sky and rushed toward the fog of concealment like a flock of birds. In the silver mist, The monsters produced by the egg of the beast god weren't erased immediately. Instead, they constantly launched attacks to disperse the silver mist. This undoubtedly meant that the fog of concealment's devouring ability wasn't working well. However, as a disaster that had run rampant for thousands of years, the fog of concealment wasn't suppressed. Instead, it launched a counterattack in an unexpected way. Under Luo Ya's astonished gaze, countless figures began to appear in the rolling silver mist. They were similar to the bone dragon that Altacia took out from the mist, but the species was more complicated. The chaotic battle between the two factions in the sky began. The black, deformed creatures sprayed mud, corroding the bodies of the undead creatures. On the other side, the undead army of various races displayed their various abilities. The skeletal dragons breathed, the winged ones extracted curses, and the gargoyles tore the bodies of the monsters apart in various ways. Such a scene could be said to be completely out of everyone's expectations, especially the sudden appearance of the hidden mist. As the initiator of the extremely influential Tucker Fortress incident, its appearance had aroused the panic of many soldiers led by the Tucker Fortress guards. Fortunately, because of the fierce battle between the egg of the beast god and the egg of the beast god, the chaos of the humans did not last for too long. "Quick, take this opportunity to get rid of them," the general shouted. At the same time, in the human camp, the red-haired girl also issued an order. The bugle horn sounded, and in the midst of the bugle horn, the human army began to clean up the black monsters while gradually retreating. On the other side, the mutated army also began to retreat. The Nuwa Ire in the sky emitted a light, bombarding the monsters in the sky while trying to get closer to Luoya. After the king of the mutated race retreated, Wilhelmina, who had stopped the battle, also began to rush towards Luoya's position. The egg of the beast god was indeed a product that surprised Luoya. At one point, the black-haired youth even felt that it was more troublesome than the king of the mutated race. However, it had to be said that the monsters it produced were not that strong. Watching the two monsters attacking each other in the sky, under the illumination of the silver moon, the youth's eyes flickered and his expression was complicated. This ancient disaster was bound to appear. It was only a matter of time. This was Luo Ya's thought at that time, but he did not expect it to come in such a grand manner, even reversing the sun and moon. However, what he really cared about was not the majestic appearance, but the timing of the fog of concealment's arrival. Such a thought emerged in his mind, making the black-haired youth uncontrollably restless. Bangar, that was a true god. Although it seemed to be an understatement, but in fact, in order to defeat him, Luoya had paid a huge price, almost pushing himself to the edge of life and death. Therefore, when the egg of the beast god appeared again, Luoya's heart was constantly on alert because he no longer had the ability to fight. Perhaps because of the danger and high difficulty of this operation, Nuwa Ire and the others seemed to have found trustworthy people. Although they were far away, Luoya saw many familiar figures in the army. To be honest, when he saw such an army, Luoya's feelings in his heart were indescribable. Of course, there were many reasons for coming to Luoya's rescue. It was not only personal feelings, but more importantly, Luoya's value. But even so, they were betting their lives to open up a way for Luoya. In fact, if it were not for their help, Luoya would not have the chance to fight one-on-one with the king of the mutated race. Just this point alone determined Luoya's choice. At the moment when he decided to fight, this thought flashed through Luoya's mind. However, just as he was about to take action, the world suddenly changed. Hidden Fog arrived at the battlefield at an extremely fast speed, as if to prevent him from attacking again. The last time Hidden Fog appeared in front of Luoya, it was not for anything else but to kill him. This time, Luoya was about to fight with the egg of the beast god. Hidden Fog, who had a certain level of intelligence, could have watched from the sidelines for a while instead of aggressively attracting all the attention of the egg of the beast god. Could it be Mother? But if that was the case, if it was a coincidence, then forget it. If stopping Luoya from continuing to destroy his soul was really Mother's intention, then it meant that Mother really inherited the memory of the historical fragment. But if that was the case, why was she not even willing to look at him? Roar! In the sky, the beast-headed giant's hand burst out a violent spell wave, and then it suddenly hit the silver fog in front of him. At this moment, hidden fog roared, and countless undead rushed toward the fist, but it was useless. Hundreds of undead turned into white bones and fell from the sky, while the fist kept moving forward. Amidst the explosion, the fist of the beast-headed giant penetrated the body of the fog of concealment, and the huge curse power hidden within exploded from the inside, making a muffled thunder-like sound, followed by the painful roar of the ancient disaster. It was not the dependent that caused damage, but the fist directly penetrated Hidden Fog's body. Under such an attack, Hidden Fog, which had no physical form, fell into a total disadvantage and had to pull away to start fighting. 6 disasters aside, if the egg of the beast god won, it would be the worst for both humans and Luoya. Not good. If this goes on, those were tiny, light dots, like light fragments, floating in the sky and filling the earth. They also existed on the battlefield. They scattered around like light elves, and unknowingly, they had spread all over the desert. Wait, these are... What's going on? The magic element suddenly disappeared. On the battlefield, the soldiers who were retreating raised their heads and looked up at the light that gathered in the sky. In the center of the desert, the black-haired young man who had already recognized the light looked at the familiar disaster with his eyes wide open, speechless. This was the disaster that fought with Luoya to the last moment in the historical fragment, and it helped him turn the tide. It was also a light that could infinitely absorb the spell power and continue to expand. Unlike the other 6 disasters, the moment it appeared, it meant that the horn of attack had been blown, and a thunderous blow had already been prepared. As time passed, the aurora in the sky had formed, and the flickering light became brighter and brighter. Even the night was dispelled by it. Just when the light was about to reach its peak, a spell wave suddenly appeared, and Luoya instantly focused his attention. When he noticed this, the black-haired young man suddenly raised his head, and his golden eyes stared at the top of devouring light. The next moment, under the cluster of light, a silver figure appeared. However, at the moment when it appeared, Luoya suddenly widened his eyes, and the reason was very simple. AI Lizzie, not good. This distance. The moment such a thought appeared, the world was buried in the light, and the young man's consciousness was completely erased in a white mist. Chapter 604. The disappearance of AI Lizzie could be said to be the worst news Luoya had heard since he returned to the modern world. However, due to his own bad situation, Luoya forced himself not to think about this matter until he found traces of AI Lizzie in the fog of concealment. That was what Luoya thought before, but when he saw AI Lizzie again, the black-haired boy realized that this idea might be wrong. When he saw the silver-haired girl with red eyes above the flashing aurora, Luoya couldn't help but exclaim out loud. At the same time, he once again used his curse power to rush into the sky. Wait, stop. The Witch Queen's voice was anxious, and the evil god suggested in a rare serious tone. However, even so, Luoya still couldn't control himself at this moment. But what he didn't expect was that he didn't even attract the girl's attention when he rushed into the sky. Originally, Luoya thought that AI Lizzie was controlling the 6 disasters. In this case, it was normal for Fog of Concealment to intervene in the battle before Luoya and the Egg of the Beast God started fighting. After all, if it was AI Lizzie, she would definitely do her best to protect Luoya. Remember, if it was really to save Luoya, then not to mention the action, the concern in her eyes couldn't be hidden. But the silver-haired girl who appeared didn't even look at him from beginning to end. These 2 possibilities appeared in Luoya's mind, and the black-haired boy was in a dilemma for a moment. After all, if AI Lizzie deliberately ignored Luoya for some reason, such as the Mother Goddess's surveillance, then rushing over now might put the girl in a disadvantageous position. However, the next moment, the girl used her own actions to help Luoya make a judgment. From Luoya's current position, although the target of the light of engulfment was the beast-headed giant, it would undoubtedly involve Luoya. And with the boy's current fragile state, his life might even be in danger under such an attack. When he realized this, Luo Ya's heart suffered an unimaginable impact. He widened his eyes and stopped moving, even forgetting to defend himself. However, the silver-haired girl's expression didn't change at all. In the historical fragment, the black-haired boy once used this as his final trump card to successfully reverse the situation. Because of this, the flashing light became one of the rare 6 disasters that was close to Luo Ya. However, it had to be said that those were just beautiful dreams after all. The aurora that gathered countless light spots shot out, and the moment his vision turned into a white light, Luo Ya remembered to defend himself. Unfortunately, the situation was far worse than what the boy expected. Light of engulfment. That was a disaster that greedily devoured all curse power. It was also the most dangerous attack among the 6 disasters. Because it was light itself, it was almost impossible to dodge if one didn't anticipate it in advance. On the other hand, all curse power defenses would quickly be devoured and disintegrated under the impact of the light. The golden light was like a god's spear, rapidly devouring the beast-headed giant's shield. Facing this situation, the beast-headed giant roared, but it was futile. In just a few seconds, the wave-like light broke through the egg of the beast god's defense and completely engulfed it. The curse power barrier was easily shattered. The black-haired boy desperately tried to mobilize the power of the crown stone, but because of the damage to his soul, he could only release a little cold air. Luo Ya, no. Nuaire, don't use curse power. Chapter 605. On the battlefield, the roars of the beasts continued. There was a slight smell of blood in the wind. Billowing smoke rose from the ground in the distance. Sniffing the smell in the air and looking at everything in front of her, the silver-haired girl couldn't help but be slightly stunned. It was as if she had returned to the battlefield in ancient times where all races bet their fates. Corpses, fresh blood, endless conflicts, fallen giants, fallen angels, and roaring gods. Roughly speaking, these were the things that appeared in Carwin's mind the most. But in contrast to such a heavy and heroic scene, the reason why Carwin's thought of these things was simple. It was just that they were more eye-catching. Such thoughts were the reason why the girl was able to extract impressions from those distant memories. If others were to hear these words, they would definitely be criticized as cruel and callous, or even despise life. However, in reality, this was not the case. The girl's reaction to this was only because these memories were filled with a sense of nothingness, like rootless duckweed. She knew but could not understand anything. Thinking about this, the silver-haired girl shook her head and looked at the battlefield where the beast-headed giant was fighting with the hidden fog. Her red eyes were filled with a hint of surprise. This wasn't normal. Instead, it was a standard anomaly. The reason why the girl could say so was very simple, because not long ago, she was also one of the many humans. But even so, the only thing Elisa could remember was her name. She didn't have much of a sense of her body and didn't have much sympathy for the humans on the battlefield. After all, the current Elisa had very vague memories of her time as Elisa, and this was inevitable. 1 second to remember. The memories of countless years were too vast. It was far more than the 10 years when the girl was a human. Because of this, the memories when she was a human were scattered. Until now, she still couldn't piece them together. However, AI Lizzie didn't care. After all, their standpoints had changed. Both sides were just enemies. In such a situation, what could she do when she remembered the memories when she was a human? It would only add to her troubles. What she had to do next wouldn't change. It was a natural reaction from the power that once belonged to the mother goddess in her body. It was a natural disgust towards the power of the savior. Even if she abandoned these, the egg of the beast god was still a deformed object created by the enemy. This thought flashed through the girl's mind, but she wasn't surprised. After all, AI Lizzie was certain that she was a genius among humans. AI Lizzie had already expected someone to call her name before she came here, so she didn't waver. But for some reason, the moment she heard this voice, her originally calm heart suddenly became inexplicably unsettled. The moment she discovered this, Her scarlet eyes couldn't help but widen slightly. She tried her best to control herself from turning her head. However, because of this distraction, the direction of the tide of light changed slightly. The AI Lizzie noticed this and hurriedly corrected it. However, the direction of the impact did not immediately change. Fortunately, the main mission was completed. Thinking of this, AI Lizzie put down her hand, but the irritation in her heart did not disappear. She couldn't help but glance in the direction of the sound, but her line of sight was completely blocked by the tide of light. No, wait, what am I doing? I'll leave the rest to you. The next moment, the silver-haired girl stepped forward and completely disappeared in the flickering light in the sky. In the slightly dim corridor, a spatial crack formed by dense curse power suddenly appeared. Light footsteps could be heard from within. Not long after, a silver-haired girl with scarlet eyes walked into the corridor from the spatial crack. She stopped and looked around and took a deep breath. Perhaps because she inherited part of the Mother Goddess power, AI Lizzie felt very close to this place. Returning here could be considered as returning home. However, compared to when she left, the girl's expression was a bit strange. According to common sense, the silver-haired girl shouldn't have left after that attack. Instead, she should have continued to command the complete destruction of the egg of the beast god. After all, compared to leaving it to the 6 calamities, with limited intelligence, this was safer. But for some reason, the girl couldn't help but want to escape from there, just like a child who didn't dare to be seen by others after doing something wrong. That was, as a human, her biological parents had already passed away. She remembered that she was already scheduled to be adopted by another family. Putting aside her appearance, the young girl's personality alone was definitely not cute. In fact, she was even a little cold. As for the family that adopted her, the young girl didn't feel that she could open her heart to them. This was because Elisa remembered that the reason why her father died was to protect the head of the noble family that adopted her. And so, these were the thoughts that AI Lizzie had all along. However, after going to the battlefield and hearing that call, the silver-haired girl's thoughts started to waver. Thinking of this possibility, the girl frowned and her heart became more and more chaotic. But before AI Lizzie could clear her thoughts, a series of footsteps came from behind her. The silver-haired girl turned around and saw a maid whose body was a wooden puppet. Although this building was recreated from the memories of the Mother Goddess, in fact, the Mother Goddess was in a deep sleep most of the time. The ones in charge of managing the Divine Tower were these puppets, and the only guest was AI Lizzie. And there was only one reason why these usually self-disciplined puppets would take the initiative to disturb AI Lizzie, and that was the summons of the Mother Goddess. After opening the door, it was an exquisite space with silver-style decorations. And at the end of the long table, there was a woman whose hair and eyes were similar to AI Lizzie's, but she was more mature. No matter if it was the power or the massive amount of ancient memories, the source was this woman who looked similar to her, and the two of them were indeed inseparable. Good evening, AI Lizzie. You're back earlier than expected. Because it went rather smoothly. Perhaps the silver-haired woman noticed the girl's unnaturalness. After a few seconds of silence, she looked at AI Lizzie and replied without saying anything else. Seeing this, the girl heaved a sigh of relief and prepared to sit down. Of course, although it was management, the intelligent 6 calamities actually didn't require much attention from AI Lizzie. After all, no one had been controlling them for thousands of years, and there weren't any major problems. About a month ago, the sea of consciousness where the Mother Goddess was in a deep sleep had a violent turbulence, and it even affected AI Lizzie. But when the girl asked what happened, the silver-haired woman didn't tell her. In fact, at the beginning, the Mother Goddess's memories materialized in the city in the ocean at the end of the world, which was also the place where AI Lizzie first met the Mother Goddess. But after that incident, the location suddenly changed to the Tower of Babel in the middle of the plains. But as time passed, AI Lizzie realized that the situation wasn't as simple as she thought. Apart from that, the strangest thing was the seating problem. Regarding this situation, the Mother Goddess didn't give any explanation, so the girl didn't know the reason. But occasionally, the silver-haired woman who was eating with AI Lizzie would be distracted and stare blankly at the seat, and only after a long time would she come back to her senses. After Elisa was brought to the designated position by the maid, she quietly waited for the attendants. Meanwhile, the mother goddess once again looked at the chair on her right. She seemed to be thinking about something, but it also seemed like she wasn't thinking about anything. However, this time, unlike the past, the mother goddess didn't lower her head in silence. Instead, she turned around and looked at Elisa. Looking at the girl beside her, the mother goddess asked with a calm expression. Hearing this, Lizzie was slightly surprised and couldn't help but recall the call to her on the battlefield. If there's something you're concerned about, then it's probably the completion rate of the egg of the beast god. Although it took a long time to cultivate, the savior did create something similar to the power of the oracles. The somewhat unbearable silence continued in the banquet hall, and Lizzie's heart uncontrollably sped up. At this moment, the girl had an inexplicable feeling that the mother goddess didn't want to hear about the previous matters. Nothing. During the entire meal, the two didn't have any other interactions, and only after the banquet ended did the silver-haired woman look at the girl beside her, as if she was hesitating about something, and after a moment, she asked, "I didn't recover much. After all, compared to the many memories Mother has, those things aren't worth mentioning." Hearing the silver-haired girl's words, the mother goddess once again fell into silence, and after a moment, she nodded and replied. Her expression was still very calm, and there were almost no fluctuations in her emotions, but for some reason, Lizzie intuitively felt that she didn't seem to like this answer. "Mother?" Looking at the surprised girl, the mother goddess didn't say much. She stood up, floated in the air, and after a moment, slowly disappeared from the hall. Chapter 606. Since ancient times, the history of mankind had evolved through war and peace. The end of a large-scale battle would often trigger a series of chain reactions. As for the degree of reaction, it would depend on the size of the battle and the situation of each country at that time. That's why Luoya is my subject. Don't you understand? Currently, the few of them were in the middle of the battlefield. The aurora that destroyed the egg of the beast god in the sky had yet to disappear. Although the hidden fog that once attacked the humans was severely injured, it had yet to disappear. With these two monsters occupying the sky, the humans below were under great pressure. Although the battle with the mutants had come to an end, the situation was actually more critical in terms of danger. This was because whether it was Nuair, Xiaoluot, or Lillian, Williams, and the others who understood the situation of the Royal Selection Tribe, they all knew one thing: the relationship between the Royal Selection Tribe and the Six Calamities. Although the egg of the beast god was despicable, it was a means to balance the battlefield. Previously, it was still fine when it fought with the Six Calamities, but now that one side was defeated, the danger index of the humans rose sharply. In order to avoid this situation, the girls thought of the idea of breaking out of the encirclement separately. Because of this problem, the few people who retreated quickly under the protection of the army gathered together. The first to attack was Nuair, who was flying in the sky. As the monarch of Luoya, the blonde girl strongly requested to leave the young man in her care. However, the other three rejected this request. Remember, no. In the face of the blonde girl's proposal, the three of them objected in unison. The reddish-haired girl's reaction was the most intense. After all, Luoya was in Xiaoluot's hands, so she was the first to refute. After pausing for a moment, Xiaoluot became emotional. She controlled the golden soul to wrap around Luoya and moved quickly. At the same time, she pointed at the battle angel square behind her. SK. The blonde girl was defeated in the first round. Xiaoluot heaved a sigh of relief. However, before the girl could rejoice, Lillian suddenly approached and stared coldly at Xiaoluot, who claimed to be her fiancé. What? What a joke. Lillian, are you crazy? Have you forgotten Emperor Lucas's orders? Handed over to you? Your Austin Empire is the most suspicious, okay? Over the past 2 years, Lillian's power had not weakened at all. On the contrary, it had become even more powerful, especially in the eastern region. Even Emperor Lucas might not be able to do anything to her. No, I don't agree with this decision. Lillian, although your 10 cities can protect Luoya, you are the owner of the king's blood, right? How can two possessors of the king's blood be in the same team? Isn't that twice as attractive to the 6 disasters? Upon hearing Wilhelmina's words, Lillian's expression stiffened. In an instant, she was at a loss for words. And after pondering carefully, she had to admit that the gray-blue-haired young lady's words made sense. Chapter 607. It was an indisputable fact that Luoya Akhat had a rich experience in dreaming. The black-haired boy was helpless in this situation, but he couldn't change anything. In fact, Luoya didn't hate this situation. After all, if he could dream, at least it meant that he was still alive. What's wrong, Daddy? Looking at the little girl who was happily holding his hand, Luoya blinked. After hesitating for a moment, he shook his head, and some doubts flashed in his heart. What's going on? Who is this child? At this time, the girl who was happily smiling in front of Luoya was only 4 or 5 years old, but her appearance was already very promising. Not to mention her soft black hair, her facial features were also too delicate. So cute. No, should I say beautiful? This gaze. Daddy, do you like me? Buffed. I'm just kidding. Daddy is so serious. Ha ha ha. Looking at the child who suddenly held her stomach and laughed, Luoya muttered in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the familiar white holy city wall in the distance, and then he couldn't help but be stunned. This is the holy city. The color of the city wall is very special. Daddy, you should be familiar with it, right? Looking at the nearby vendors, the black-haired boy said with a puzzled expression. As the capital of the Holy Church, Luoya had been to the most, except for Akhat City, but the problem was that he had never been to a commercial street like this. Even if he wanted to buy something, the Akhat family only needed to contact the Sorofia Merchant Association, and then President Alvin, who had dealt with Luoya before, would arrange everything properly. He was simply a delivery specialist. Looking at the girl in front of him, Luoya slightly narrowed his eyes. To be honest, the boy couldn't imagine that he would forget such a little girl with such obvious characteristics. Not to mention the appearance that stunned Luoya, the most important thing was the girl's hair and eyes color. Could it be that I imagined a daughter out of thin air? Daddy, what are you thinking about? Really, it's rare to have a chance to go shopping together. Let's go. Thinking so, the black-haired boy sighed and began to walk along the girl's lead. The nearby vendors gradually opened, and there were more and more shouting on both sides. Miss, how about an apple? It's a special apple from the eastern region. It's very sweet. Eastern region? You really know how to brag. Thinking of this, Luoya's face showed displeasure. He didn't want to pay the IQ tax to the unscrupulous peddler. However, looking at the girl's shining eyes below, the black-haired boy fell silent. Daddy. In less than 2 seconds, the black-haired young man was defeated. Upon hearing Luoya's words, the girl happily threw herself into his arms. It's nothing. I'll buy it if I want it. It's just that there are no apples planted in the eastern region, so, huh? At this time, the girl lowered her head slightly, not knowing what she was thinking. However, the atmosphere around her was a little strange, making Luoya feel an inexplicable sadness. But before he could ask for more details, she raised her head again. Oh, sure. So it's like that. After the apple, Luoya accompanied the girl to a lot of places, from the more serious clothing stores, jewelry stores, and roadside stalls. And as the number of places they went increased, Luoya's hands became heavier and heavier. But in the face of the girl in front of him, for some reason, Luoya had no resistance at all. Or rather, every time he saw her happy face, he even wanted to buy more. Daddy, come here. After thinking for a long time, Luoya suddenly realized something. But before he could think carefully, he was pulled by the girl to a new stall. But this time, the goods were a bit strange. All of them were obviously damaged second-hand weapons and armor. These things were picked up from the eastern region. Don't look bad. In the past, they were all used by nobles. Maybe they are relics that a great noble is looking for. If they were really relics from the eastern region of the last Holy War, then they should have been buried in the ground for at least 80 years. How could they look like they were only used for a few years? Even if you want to cheat a fool, you can't cheat like this, right? Wait, isn't this a new standard armor? It's not an antique from 80 years ago. This? Didn't you say that they were picked up from the eastern region? What? Do you know the owner of this thing? Then hurry up and buy it, before the corpse is transported back. The corpse of a victim of the Holy War. What's going on? You don't even know this. Looking at the frowning stall owner, Luo Yu's eyes widened and fell into silence. Daddy? This is boring, let's go. Wait, if I think about it carefully, even if the streets may be pieced together from my other memories, there is no such situation where I directly communicate with the stall owner of the market. I have also never seen equipment from the battlefield being sold. These things shouldn't be made out of nothing in a dream, right? After all, it's strange to be awake in a dream, right? Is this really my dream? Really, it's all Daddy's fault for thinking so much. Can't we continue to play like this? Well, Daddy is right. This is actually my dream. Originally, Akat Hill, where Grandfather lived, was the place I went the most in the theocracy, but there were too many changes there, so I can't use it. I just didn't expect the holy capital to have so many flaws. What a big failure. Well, I'm not Daddy's fantasy. I'm Daddy's real daughter. You can tell by looking at my eyes and hair, right? Hearing the girl's words, Luoya suddenly widened his eyes, then hurriedly squatted down and looked at the girl with the same black hair and golden eyes. Even if it's a time curse, it's too difficult to go back to the past, but if it's a form similar to precognitive dreams, the difficulty will be greatly reduced. As if hearing Luo Yu's thoughts, the black-haired girl happily nodded, and Luo Yu's mood suddenly became excited. He looked at the girl in front of him and couldn't help but ask the question that he had been ignoring. No, although I really want to tell Daddy my name. I can't. It will cause some troublesome effects. Well, that's right, that's why I've been holding back from telling Daddy. But even so, Daddy still brought me to play. Saying so, Luoya stretched out his hand to touch the girl's cheek, but he didn't expect that before he could touch her, the black-haired girl took the initiative to rub against him like a kitten. Seeing this situation, Luoya was slightly stunned and couldn't help but feel warm in his eyes, but after thinking for a moment, he still asked the question that he was most concerned about. Luoya smiled bitterly with a helpless expression. Although Luoya was almost certain that the girl in front of him was his child, because the hair and eyes of the two were too similar, Luoya couldn't infer the child's mother. As for the appearance, is that so? Then forget it. By the way, using such a dangerous method like time curse to see me in my dream, is there something important? Time curse, that was a powerful curse that humans hadn't even touched the threshold of. Normally, such a curse couldn't be cast by a girl of a few years old, even in a dream. But now that it had been cast, it must be meaningful. No, although there are some other purposes, but if it's just me, I just want Daddy to accompany me for a day. Looking at the girl who showed a somewhat forced smile, Luo Yu's eyes were filled with confusion, and then an indescribable sense of apology gushed out from his heart. No, it's not Daddy's fault. It's because of some things, so that is. Seeing the gradually shattering dream world, the black-haired girl sighed, and Luoya also understood the meaning of this situation. Well, it seems like it's going to end, Daddy. Facing the girl who said so with a somewhat sorrowful smile, the black-haired boy fell into silence, and suddenly, there was a slight pain in the depths of his heart. This knowledge made Luo Yu's heart heavy. After thinking for a moment, Luoya put his hands on the girl's shoulders and said softly, Daddy, I know you may think that my words are baseless, but this is the truth. It's impossible for me not to like such a cute daughter. I apologize in advance for not spending enough time with you. If it's possible, I will definitely change. In Luo Yu's apology, the black-haired girl's expression suddenly distorted, and then she couldn't help but choke with sobs. Seeing this situation, the black-haired boy panicked for a moment, but before he could say anything, the girl regained control of her emotions, and the surrounding scenery became more and more distorted as time passed. What? Well, I understand. Then it's settled. The boy said so, holding the girl's outstretched hand, and the black-haired girl's face revealed a satisfied smile with tears. The next moment, Luo Ya's eyes flashed, and his consciousness returned to the world. Chapter 608. Normally, dreams would not leave behind many memories. This was common knowledge. However, today, the young man unexpectedly discovered that even if it was a dream, it would still leave an impression in people's memories, especially when he had a daughter out of nowhere. It was the figure of a young girl who was hugging him in front of her. Her long black hair was draped over her shoulders, forming a strong contrast with her fair skin. She had a small and perky nose, cherry lips that made one want to kiss, and amethyst-like eyes that revealed an inexplicable mystery. Her entire aura was both noble and inexplicably cold. "Aya, you're finally awake?" "Yep, it's me." Feeling the excitement in his heart, Luoya suddenly got up and hugged the young girl. Lillian was slightly stunned for a moment before she smiled and hugged him back. For a long-distance relationship that hadn't seen each other for a long time, there was no need for words the moment they met. All they needed was each other's warmth. For Luoya and Lillian, there was also the resonance of being blood-related. Senior, how have you been for the past year? Because I entered a historical fragment. So, Senior, Lillian had always been the most reliable existence in Luoya's heart. She was even stronger than Nua Iyer, who was outstanding in all aspects except for XP. After all, Miss Angel was restricted by the Holy See, and there were many things that she couldn't do. However, Lillian was almost completely independent in the Austin Empire's venomous insect breeding. She was a reliable and mature woman who was also extremely intelligent. Most importantly, the two of them were blood-related and couldn't betray each other. It could be said that she was the person Luoya trusted and relied on the most since he came to this world. However, such a young girl actually said the word despair. "Senior, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Although that's the case, I've made you suffer for the past year. If that's the case, no matter what excuse you use, it's still my fault. Although it's indeed a painful time when I think about it, I'm not that unreasonable. Besides, you've actually left me with the motivation to continue living." Looking at the black-haired, purple-eyed young girl, Luoya was momentarily confused. Seeing this, Lillian gently stroked her lower abdomen and revealed a blissful smile. After the main strategic objective of the Scorched Earth campaign was accomplished, under the joint command of the four girls, the emergency communication system had already begun to transmit information to all parties, and the faint troops were organized to retreat in an orderly manner. "Your Holiness, we have successfully retreated from the battlefield. May I ask if you need to send someone to support us? If possible, can you tell us the approximate location?" Gazing at the liaison officer in the projection, the white-haired old man lifted his head and asked casually. Upon hearing this question, the King of Sword, who was stopping the bleeding on his leg, came to a halt. Antonio, who sat by the side and hugged his staff, couldn't help but lift his head and look over. "I see. Very good. Thank you for your hard work. Then according to the rules, we'll contact each other again after 12 hours. After a brief reply, the influence disappeared. John of the Holy See turned around and smiled. "Yes, this is an unexpected piece of good news. Thanks to this, the graduation ceremony will probably be more lively," the old man said with a serious expression. Antonio shook his head helplessly at his old friend's stubbornness. What?" Looking at the white-robed old man, Antonio asked with a serious expression. John, who heard this, was silent for a moment and shook his head. The king of the mutants was defeated by Luoya single-handedly. The king of the mutants, Bangar, was the king of the race that existed in ancient times. He had definitely reached the realm of the deities. Although his strength might have faded after a long time, he was definitely not someone an ordinary level 1 source level could deal with, and for Luoya to be able to defeat him, it meant that his peak combat strength was comparable to the deities. Humans finally have a deity-level powerhouse? If it was during peacetime, The rulers who were solely focused on maintaining their ruling position would probably pay extra attention to Luo Ya's existence and even regard him as a great enemy. But for the human race that was now on the verge of extinction, even if it was incomplete, it was still a great thing to have a powerhouse that could fight against the deities. Putting aside John of the Holy See, Antonio was the dean of the school who had taken care of Luo Ya a lot. Both of them also had the common goal of resurrecting Estrella. Friedrich was an original member of the Evening Sage Association and was also the descendant of the knight left behind by Luo Ya's ancestors. The growth of the black-haired young man made the three of them feel relieved. However, humans did not have much time to breathe because after the mutants, the problems that followed were even more serious. If that light is the 6 disasters, then the threat of the Mother Goddess can be regarded as greater than that of the Savior, at least on the surface. Well, it seems that we have to free up our hands and balance out both sides. Although the threat of the mutants was a conflict between races, its essence was still the aftermath of the resurrection of the Savior. After the death of the mutants' king, the threat level of the mutants to the humans had decreased. On the contrary, the 6 disasters that had been ignored by the humans had stepped onto the stage. The destruction of the 3-race alliance in the prophecy must come from the Mother Goddess or the Savior. Then, there was only one thing that the humans, who were the weakest, could do, and that was to be the third force to balance out the power of the Mother Goddess. Of course, this situation was only limited to theory. If the humans tried to control this ancient battle with their bodies, sooner or later, they would anger one of the parties. But even so, the strategy of balance could buy the humans a lot of time, so that the younger generation would have enough time to grow. John of the Holy See withdrew his gaze and looked at the other 2 old men. Both of them had a determined expression on their faces. The emergency contact said that we should go back as soon as possible. Then let me use the transfer spell. The old men chatted and laughed as they prepared for their return. And with this as the beginning, the conflict between the humans and the Mother Goddess became more and more inevitable. Baby? Luo Ya naturally didn't need to explain the meaning of the word baby, since she didn't have any communication barriers. But she had to admit that this news was too sudden, so Luo Ya couldn't react in time. Wait, could it be that? Yes, that should be our baby. Where is it? It's right in front of you. Gazing at Lillian, who smiled helplessly and stroked her belly, Luo Ya widened her golden eyes. The black-haired, purple-eyed young lady smiled and said, "That's right." Lillian recalled last night's experience. After quickly retreating from the battlefield and confirming that the 6 disasters weren't pursuing them, she fell asleep for a moment. It was also at that moment that she dreamed of a blurry figure of a child. Not only that, but it was also because of her reminder that I was able to lead the troops here. Could it be that she wants to use the time curse to try and change something? Gazing at Lillian, Luo Ya couldn't help but put up a stern expression. If it weren't for the interference of the time curse, Lillian wouldn't have gone all out in this battle. In other words, in the desert, the human forces would be reduced by nearly half. In that case, everyone's fate would change. Was it a serious injury? Or was it, Senior Luo Ya, have you been using spells to maintain the child's state for the past 2 years? Recalling Wilhelmina, who had reached the source level 1, Lillian let out a helpless sigh. But in fact, she didn't feel much regret. Even though considering Luo Ya and Lillian's situation, there shouldn't be any issues with the child's appearance and talents, Lillian's motherly love overflowed uncontrollably when she saw such an adorable child who was considerate of her parents. No, that's the result of pregnancy vomiting. The spell froze my body's state in that period. But even so, I'm almost at my limit. The spell is depleting faster than I expected. I'm afraid there's less than a year left. When the time comes, the matter will surely be exposed. Even though Luo Ya didn't know the reason, he was wary of the royal family. In order to keep Lillian away from Luo Ya, he didn't hesitate to transfer her to the border. In such a situation, it was hard to imagine that he would allow their child to be born successfully. At this thought, Luo Ya asked with a stern expression. After a few moments of silence, Lillian answered, "I see." Even though Luo Ya didn't know the exact strength of Lillian's forces due to her disappearance, It was apparent from her 400,000 troops. And with so many people gathered together, perhaps even Lillian couldn't stop them. Most importantly, Lillian's idea wasn't delusional. On the contrary, she had a high chance of winning. After all, even in the Austin Empire, which had a huge population, 400,000 elite troops at the border was a huge force. With this alone, Lillian could crush the other two heirs. The only obstacle was the current emperor. After pondering for a few moments, Lillian stated her goal. Luoya nodded in understanding. Senior sister, what do you plan to do if things don't go well? Upon hearing Luoya's question, Lillian pondered for a few moments before letting out a sigh. Then, she gazed at the young man and curled the corners of her lips. On the other hand, Luoya widened his eyes slightly before nodding with a smile. Aggrieved? I don't think so. Besides, it's not just me. Yes, it's our family. I will. Definitely. Luoya nodded and looked at Lillian as though he was making an oath and made a second promise. Chapter 609. Luoya believed that every battle had its own rewards. However, unlike the past, the black-haired young man had other rewards this time. Listening to the gentle breathing of the young lady, feeling the warmth of her body and the texture of her skin, the black-haired young man had a gentle expression on his face. He stared at the sleeping face of the elf lady beside him and couldn't help but think about the past few days. Although Wilhelmina only chatted with Luoya that night and stayed by her bedside, the other three young ladies still rolled their eyes at the black-haired young man. However, compared to the recent situation of the human alliance, these were all small matters. The real big thing was the return of St. John and the others. At the same level, the mutants' regenerative ability was far superior to the humans. Therefore, the humans would fall into a difficult battle. This law applied even to the Source Level 1 mutants. After battling with the 3 Source Level 1 mutants for a day, the 3 famous kings of the humans were all injured. Fortunately, Nuwa Iyer used the Angel King bloodline ability to corrode and assimilate the curse power. After dealing with this troublesome power, Nuwa Iyer was able to recover. Until the human army left, the 6 calamities in the distant sky didn't disperse. However, these ancient calamities didn't attack at all. On the other hand, after the victory of the Scorched Earth battle, the entire eastern front line gradually calmed down. Although there were victories and losses between the two sides, the overall gains were far greater than the losses. After Luoya defeated one of the 6 calamities, St. John intended to make Luoya a saint of the Holy Church. However, before he could confer the title, Luoya disappeared completely. At that time, there were still some disagreements within the Holy Church. However, this time, Luoya saved hundreds of thousands of people in Tucker Fortress. The situation was completely different. A living saint. This is an extremely rare example in the Roman Curia. Their status is only below that of the Holy See. However, you don't need to work in the Roman Curia. You'll still be free. I can guarantee that. Upon hearing these words, Miss Angel, who originally wanted to use this as an excuse to let Luoya stay in the Holy Capital, widened her eyes. She couldn't help but stare at the young man with hidden bitterness in her eyes and give up on her idea. After Prince Kai-in personally expressed his gratitude, he asked about Ka-dia's condition. It seemed like he wanted to look for this old friend of his to recuperate together. Luoya understood his intentions. After the great victory of the Scorched Earth battle, the strength of the humans and the aliens had completely changed. The crisis of extinction could be said to have been temporarily resolved. After confirming that the 6 disasters didn't make any changes, the entire human alliance was immersed in optimism. The atmosphere was quite relaxed, and it wasn't rare to see people like Kai-in preparing to rest for a while. This incident can be said to be a turning point. With your help, humans now have the power to fight against God-level existences. Unfortunately, this is only the beginning. That is indeed the case. You want humans to be the third party to balance the power of the Mother Goddess and the Savior? That's almost impossible, right? But even so, the black-haired young man was still conflicted about the idea of Antonio and the others, and the reason was actually known to Luoya. It was because of the memory in the historical fragment. The possibility of going to war with the mother goddess was something that Luoya had always forced himself not to think about. But now, it might become something that he had to do for the sake of humans. On the other hand, Luoya had no clue about AI Lizzie, who might be influenced by the mother goddess to leave. Give birth? Me? Normally, in order to give birth to children as soon as possible, we should gather more than 100 suitable women and try to give birth on a large scale. But you won't agree to this kind of situation, right? Dean, please don't joke around. This kind of thing is absolutely impossible. Looking at the two young ladies who had fallen into anger and could even be said to be overflowing with killing intent, Antonio, who proposed the old rules, revealed a helpless smile. At this moment, Lillian, who had an extremely cold expression, also stood up at this moment. Oh, what do you mean? Just the three of you? I understand. It is indeed human nature to give birth to better children, and it is also more likely to nurture talents. But if we defeat you, it doesn't seem impossible for Her Highness over there, right? As the first source rank, one of the younger generation, Wilhelmina was also a woman who had inherited the Holy Sword. In terms of strength, she was impeccable. When it came to outstanding women, it was impossible to avoid her. In fact, Lillian didn't bring her along on purpose from the start to act as a buffer condition for this negotiation. I understand. Then it's just the four of us. This is the bottom line. Please give us the respect we deserve, Dean. Don't test us anymore. Perhaps Antonio proposed this for the future of the human race, but the four young ladies obviously didn't want to reason with him. Even if the world were to be destroyed tomorrow, Lillian and the others wouldn't tolerate being cuckolded by more than 100 people today. Unless the entire country of scholars ascended and floated out of Shia, it would be impossible for them to escape their wrath. Facing such a threat, Antonio smiled bitterly. He stole a glance at Friedrich, who didn't say a word, but whose eyes were filled with gratitude. Then, he turned to St. John, who had a "I didn't say anything" expression. Antonio let out a sigh and nodded. Results? Thank you for your understanding. We will do our best. That's right. Up until now, Luoya hadn't said a word about this issue that concerned her. Or rather, she was bewildered. In other words, the four of you monopolized my mating rights? After witnessing the entire negotiation process, the young man cursed inwardly. But he didn't have any objections to this outcome. After all, Luoya didn't want to be a breeding animal. Antonio's plan was for the greater good of humanity, so it was difficult for Luoya to reject it. From this perspective, it was most appropriate for the young ladies to reject it. Thinking of this, the young ladies became a little anxious, especially the young lady with reddish-brown hair. She stood up immediately after Antonio left. Xiaoluot said with a firm gaze. She chased everyone out and quickly immersed herself in her work. Recalling the tortuous experience during the day, the black-haired young man let out a sigh of relief helplessly. He gazed at Xiaoluot, who was sleeping beside him, and his heart was filled with tenderness. After the others left, the young lady with reddish-brown hair gazed at Luoya. Her emerald eyes reddened instantly, and she pounced on Luoya and began to cry bitterly. Looking at Xiaoluot in this state, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be moved. It had to be said that among the four young ladies, Nuair, Xiaoluot, Lillian, and Wilhelmina, Xiaoluot, as the fiancée, was the most attached to Luoya. This was also the opposite effect of the loyalty, origin substance of the Sorofia family. As long as you loved someone deeply, you would be unswerving until death. So that's how it is. Did I become her weakness and make her imperfect? The long-awaited union exhausted Luoya, who was already in poor health. But even so, the young man who loved to the extreme couldn't stop. Fortunately, Xiaoluot was weak in this aspect and wasn't Luoya's opponent at all. Although Xiaoluot said that she was in too much pain, Luoya discovered that the young lady's figure didn't change at all. In fact, it even improved. It was simply an unsolved mystery in the world. Thinking so, the young man stared at the young lady's body and fell into deep thought. But before he could think of anything, his eyes were gently covered by a small white hand. Then, the young lady's embarrassed voice sounded. I'm sorry, but what's there to be embarrassed about now? Hearing Luo Ya's words, the young lady thought for a moment and put down her hand with a red face. Luo Ya helplessly reached out and hugged the young lady, while Xia Luo leaned on the young man's shoulder with a red face. Then, she began to care about Luo Ya's body. Yes, I'll leave it to the spirit tribe king Adavaya who signed a contract with me. Don't worry. What does that mean? Because of this, my dear. Do you still remember? Saying so, Luo Ya stretched out his hand and showed the pair of rings. Xia Luo revealed a blissful smile. Although I don't know the reason, my dear, your fate would occasionally fluctuate strangely, and at those times, I would feel a familiar feeling from the rings. Yes, it's the aura of 6 disasters. Hearing Xia Luo's words, the black-haired young man couldn't help but be stunned. The next moment, he suddenly thought of something and looked at the system abruptly. And just as he expected, the skills in the system that he didn't know about before had updated. Silver Mist Devour, so that's it. Looking at this description, Luo Ya's golden eyes narrowed as he pondered carefully. Chapter 6:10. Luo Ya had to admit that before seeing the hidden mist, he had never thought of devouring existences. After all, even if it was a spell, there was a limit to what it could do. That's right. The moment Luo Ya saw the side effect of this skill, he understood its meaning. The so-called devouring existence of the Devourer of the Silver Mist's side effect should not only refer to his curse power or some other ability, but also himself. It was something similar to the concept of cause and effect, and this should also be the reason why the child could appear. It had been nearly 2 years since Lillian was pregnant. If their daughter really had the ability to travel through time, shouldn't she have been able to meet the girl a long time ago? Although Luo Ya's reminder to Lillian allowed him to avoid some unknown fate, to be honest, Luo Ya felt that this entry point was a little strange. But in fact, the little girl only appeared before Luo Ya when he was surrounded. In the past, Luo Ya thought it was a coincidence, but now it seemed that it might be related to the side effect of the Devourer of the Silver Mist skill. With this thought in mind, Luo Ya resolved part of the confusion in his heart. However, this didn't help him recover. After seeing this side effect, Luo Ya understood some of the conditions of his body, such as the fact that his curse power was very low. Luo Ya heaved a sigh of relief that it wasn't a problem with his soul. But then, he became vigilant again because if he speculated according to this situation, the worst outcome of using the Devourer of the Silver Mist frequently might even be that Luo Ya would die. It was a side effect that could lead to death. After realizing this, the black-haired young man decided to temporarily seal this ability and thought about how to solve it. But before he could think of anything, he heard the girl beside him recommending herself. What do you mean? I see. But what should I do? For this kind of thing, you just have to touch it, right? Like now. Wait a minute. Won't this affect you? Your body hasn't been in good condition for the past year, right? But, dear, who am I to you? Looking at the serious Xia Luo, after a moment of silence, Luo Ya said the answer she had answered before. Correct, but I hope you won't take so long to think about it next time. Xia Luo, I'm sorry. When I returned from Ross, I wanted to convince my father, but because of the Fallen One's attack on Akate City, I was delayed. That, my dear. Actually, I'm already a member of the Akate family in name. Looking at Xia Luo, the black-haired young man blinked in confusion. Xia Luo hurriedly explained. In order to make up for the damage caused to Xia Luo by hindering their relationship, Kadia specially wrote an open letter to admit the marriage between Luo Ya and Xia Luo. She also said that if Xia Luo was willing, the door of the Akate family would always be open to her. Because of this, the girl who was almost in despair at that time received a trace of comfort, and it was also because of this that the girl tried her best to pull herself together and walked out of the shadows to come to the front line. I'm also very grateful. Xia Luo, I hope you can promise me one thing. No matter what happens in the future, don't think about those stupid things anymore. Okay? I beg you. Looking at Luo Ya's worried and touched King Tong, the red-haired girl nodded. The two slowly embraced each other, and only separated after a long time. But, You mean, what? My dear, don't tell me you're thinking of me as a vicious woman who hopes that AI Lizzie will never come back? Yes, we always quarrel, but no matter what, we're still childhood sweethearts, and I owe her one. Uncle Kadia acknowledged the marriage, and AI Lizzie also agreed. When you weren't around, whether it was me, Nuwa Iyer, or Lillian, everyone relied on each other to barely support our spirits. Also, in name, I'm already her adopted sister. Luoya, who understood Xiaoluo's thoughts, nodded, and her heart became firm again. After exchanging glances with the girl beside her, Luoya slowly released her curse power and gradually merged with Xiaoluo. This should be the end, right? Shameless person, I can't believe that you still dare to appear before me again. In a dark castle somewhere, a black-haired man was kneeling on one knee and breathing rapidly. Not far in front of the man was a black-haired beauty. Her skin was whiter than snow, and her eyebrows were picturesque. She had a charm that could steal one's soul, but her tone was extremely cold, and her golden eyes were filled with disdain. Not to mention the wounds all over his body. Even the long sword in his right hand that was stabbed into the ground was cracked. Judging from the expensive decorations and the reaction of the curse power, it should be an incredible magic sword. However, even such a weapon didn't allow its wielder to obtain victory. As for the man himself, it was obvious that he was in a state where he was 1 second before collapsing to the ground after challenging an extremely powerful opponent. Fully armed against barehanded, even so, he was defeated. One could only imagine the overwhelming difference in strength between the two of them. However, even so, the man still seemed unwilling to give up. Please help me. I need you. The man propped himself up and tried his best to speak, but all he received was the black-haired woman's merciless mockery. However, even so, the man didn't give up. Instead, he raised his sword and got into a defensive posture. Communicate? Do you mean that you suddenly came uninvited and then said something stupid about eliminating hatred and joining hands again? You're challenging my patience limit again and again? Shut up. Shut up. I said, shut up, okay? The moment the black-haired woman said this sentence, the man who kept making suggestions paused. The next moment, as if he was hit by an invisible big hand, his body was sent flying in an instant. He crashed into the wall with the momentum of a cannonball, making a huge roar. The violent roar accompanied by the tremor spread throughout the castle. In the smoke and dust, the woman walked forward and looked at the man who rolled on the ground in a piece of rubble and frowned. Cough, cough, cough. I used to have a cousin. She's a sister from the collateral family. Her hair color is different, and she has very beautiful eyes. Her extraordinary talent is very high, but it can only be regarded as average in our family. Hearing these strange words, the man who fell to the ground fell into silence, and the woman who knocked him down did not pay attention to him. Instead, she said, she was not good at fighting, and the god who matched her contract was not the fighting type, so she was always left behind when there was a large-scale operation in the family. However, she was lucky in love and found a good husband. She was very happy at the wedding. She held me, who was still a child, and sang and danced. It's a pity that she died in the first tragedy caused by your betrayal. Hearing these words, the man's body trembled, and the black-haired woman with golden eyes continued. With each name, the concentration of the curse power around the black-haired woman increased explosively, and the shining armor made a cracking sound. However, in the face of this critical situation, the man did not move. He just apologized with a pale face. I don't need your cheap apology. I hate you. I hate your family. You are trash, pests of human beings. The current situation is completely retribution, isn't it? Do you think I don't want to kill you? I just don't want to expand my influence and attract the attention of those guys, and you are too weak, and you can't change anything. The woman turned around and said nothing more. She walked into the depths of the castle, but what she heard after such a declaration was not a discouraged sigh behind her, but a provocation with all his might. Are you kidding me? No, I'm serious. Leaving such words, The woman who was so angry that she laughed turned around and left. The man who insisted also fell down and looked at the stone ceiling of the castle silently. Your Highness, Your Highness. Such a thought appeared in his mind, but before he could figure it out, the feeling of his nose being pinched came, and the sudden suffocation made him open his eyes involuntarily. Huh? How could that be? Was that a dream? Looking helplessly at Paul, who was awakened, the maid Liz sighed, and then whispered with some vigilance, Your Highness, please wake up. There is news from Her Highness Lillian. Chapter 6:11. At the dining table in the early morning, Paul Ackman rubbed his brows and listened to the words of the maid beside him. His mind was in a mess. Seeing the black-haired young man like this, the maid Liz showed a speechless expression. That's why I said no. That's why I can't distinguish reality. Most importantly, this isn't the first time, right? Ah, I remember. Last week, you seemed to have a similar situation and sat on the bed for a long time. I see. So it's a relapse? Hearing Liz's words, Paul couldn't help but have a face full of question marks. He felt helpless, but he didn't care about the maid's words. Part of the reason was that he was an illegitimate child and a heretic excluded by the nobles. The other reason was that Liz's identity was different. No one was willing to be Paul's servant and even regarded him as an inauspicious person. After all, following an illegitimate child was almost equivalent to being exiled for these servants who completely relied on their master. Therefore, Paul didn't care about the sarcasm from such a person at all. Compared to that, the matter of the dream made him feel more strange. Of course, I don't remember. Normal people generally don't remember. Paul looked worried when he said this, and Liz blinked in surprise. Instead of calling it a dream, it was better to say that it was already a deep memory, but it was obviously very abnormal. That's why I said I didn't bump into anything. How should I put it? The kind that was beaten up? Hearing Paul's strange expression and the content of the summary was even more strange. The maid showed a suspicious look, and the black-haired young man recalled everything and didn't know how to explain. The black-haired young man was quite helpless, but there was nothing he could do. In the dream, Paul couldn't realize that he was dreaming. Even if he realized it, Paul's situation would only be worse. Yes, the current Paul was no longer the same as before. After obtaining a ranking in the Challenger's Cup and improving his treatment, the black-haired young man seemed to have embarked on the path of strength. With the further increase of magic concentration in the past year, Paul's strength had also broken through to the Source Rank 3 and walked on the battlefield in last year's battle. In terms of ability, the man in the dream was probably also the owner of the kingdom, Source Substance, and his ability was similar to Paul's. However, the set of armor in the dream today was far from the current Paul's level. Chapter 6:12. In fact, the girls around Roja had rich experience in watching over him at night. After all, Roja was a seasoned warrior and the number of times he was injured was too many to count. As the next successor of the Holy See, Nuwa Iyer Heathcliff's actions didn't only represent herself. Therefore, she couldn't do as she pleased like Xiaoluot and the others. In fact, in most people's impression, Her Royal Highness was synonymous with dignified and elegant since young. In the bedroom, Miss Angel, who was holding the golden chain, was panting. After a few hours of battle, she fell into the arms of the young man with a flushed face. Hugging Nuwa Iyer, Luoya didn't complain. Instead, he got rid of the chain and sat up. He stroked the girl's hair gently. A little, but it's okay. After all, I've already experienced it once, so I can be considered experienced, Luoya said with a bitter smile. He recalled the night in the Tucker Plains. Although it wasn't a real body, normally, the damage received when using skills would be transferred to the body after the end. So Luoya thought that Miss Angel didn't have to experience pain this time. However, that wasn't the case. I see. I'm sorry to have made you suffer. Hearing Nuwa Iyer's words, the black-haired young man apologized decisively. Miss Angel's face turned red, and she tightened her grip on the chain. That's right. Today's Nuwa Iyer was different from her usual elegant and luxurious appearance. She seemed to have something on her mind. Her actions were bolder, and her attachment to Luoya was more serious. Nuair, what's wrong with you? Is there something on your mind? Hearing Luoya's question, the blonde girl nodded. After a moment, she spoke out her worries. Scared? I say, Dean Antonio's plan should be just a suggestion. It won't be enforced. In the previous historical fragment, when the weak Luoya was about to battle with the King of Curses, priest, ancestor Estrella also asked Luoya to marry Lillian and leave the bloodline of the Chosen King clan. From this point, it could be seen that this kind of behavior had a long history in Xia. It was also recognized by the world. If that's the case, of course, it's for the best. In fact, although Dean Antonio downplayed the matter, according to the information provided by Wilhelmina, the ridiculous plan was actually quite popular, especially in a pure academic institution like the Country of Scholars. After Luoya defeated the King of the Mutants, the power of the Chosen King clan, the world was aware of the world's power. Dean's words were probably a reminder and warning to the girls. If there were no results in the next few months, things would change. Chapter 613. In the middle of the flower-filled throne, the white-haired demoness held a flower in her hand and asked softly. Her words echoed in the spacious hall. Not far away, Luoya fell into silence. Although Luoya successfully bestowed Lillian with the characteristics of a nightmare demon through the blood of his ancestor, Estrella, and thus prevented the demoness from invading her, this incident left a deep impression on Luoya. And most importantly, the demoness had once told him of her wish. Of course, not just anybody would do. With the standards of the Queen of Witches, most of the geniuses in the world were probably unworthy of their reputation, so there weren't many who were worthy of her taking action. However, the offspring of Luoya and Lillian definitely fulfilled this requirement. Looking at the white-haired demoness in the flower-filled bed, Luoya's golden pupils contracted slowly. Altacia remained expressionless, but after a long silence, Luoya shook his head slowly. It's not good to lie, Sir Hero. Looking at Altacia, who turned around and looked at him with slight dissatisfaction, Luoya strolled to the flower-filled bed and stood before her. After looking at each other for a moment, the black-haired young man suddenly raised his hand and caressed the demoness' head. The sudden action made the white-haired demoness widen her eyes abruptly. Looking at her reaction, Luoya returned to his senses and hurriedly retracted his hand, but it was a pity that Altacia caught him midway. Looking at the demoness who held the flower in her hand and waited for his answer, Luoya didn't know why, but for some reason, he felt stifled in his heart, especially the way she asked the question that was a little masochistic, which made the black-haired young man particularly uncomfortable. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like you were about to cry. No, that's really what I thought. That's unbelievable. You think I'm crying? Heh. The tears of a demoness. This is probably a joke in ancient times. The black-haired young man revealed a helpless expression. He bent over and plucked a black flower from the flower-filled bed, held it in his hand, and observed it. The white-haired demoness pondered for a moment before asking again. Yes, but that's all in the past, isn't it? Although I don't know why you're paying attention to her, I don't think you'll hurt her. No, I just don't think you'll leave me. The moment she heard the black-haired young man's hesitant words, Altacia, who had her back facing Luoya, widened her eyes. The witch's heartbeat quickened, and her cheeks began to blush. Before she could refute, a black rose appeared in front of her. You? Really? It's because you're always like this that you've caused so much trouble. Nothing. Sir Hero, can you read minds? That's true. The world isn't peaceful now. Even if I have a body, I won't be able to recover my strength in a short time. I'm afraid I'll only end up dying again. So don't worry, I won't go anywhere. Hearing Altacia's promise, Luoya smiled and nodded. On the other side, the witch, who had her back facing the young man, put the black rose on her lips as if she was smelling the fragrance of the flower, but also as if she was trying to suppress the desire to say something. I'll accompany you until the end, no matter what the result is. It's nothing. All right, Sir Hero, It's about time to go back. What's going on? Forced expulsion? This is the handwritten version of the Second Age's Dusk Sage Society. It should be the most credible one so far. On the second day after returning from the witch's palace, in the room, the black-haired young man looked at the information in front of him and fell into deep thought. Opposite him, a gray-blue-haired girl in a dress stood uncomfortably in front of the table, constantly looking at the empty space beside her. A few days ago, Antonio proposed a plan to increase the number of members in the country of scholars. In the process of negotiation, in order to create more pressure on the other side and increase the number of allies, Wilhelmina, as the princess of the country of knights, was also pulled into the group of girls, and became one of the members who monopolized Luo Ya's mating rights. To be honest, this mission was a little beyond Wilhelmina's limits. After all, although they had always been together in life and death, she had just understood that the relationship between Luo Ya and a girl who liked this kind of relationship was not even at the level of being in a relationship for the time being. Suddenly having to raise the next generation together, no matter how she thought about it, was too fast. Although I've had some fantasies before, if you're in such a situation, unless you clearly say that you hate him, he definitely won't leave you alone. So, since the ending is inevitable, it doesn't matter whether it's fast or slow, right? The most important thing now is to stop that plan, or else it will become more and more troublesome in the future. In the previous Scorched Earth battle, a character suspected to be AI Lizzie appeared on the side of the Six Disasters, and because of that, Luoya was abnormally emotional and was almost affected by the attack of the Light of Devouring. After everything was over, on the night that Wilhelmina took care of him, Luoya asked her to investigate a problem. When she heard this request, Wilhelmina knew what Luoya was thinking, so she chose to help. However, the results were not optimistic. Regarding this situation, the Twilight Sage Association had done a special research on it, and the conclusion was that the sleeping place of the Savior and Mother Goddess should be in a special space, and it was not a place that could be reached through ordinary means. When it came to space, it would naturally remind people of that disaster monster. With theoretical support and substantial evidence, from these two clues, it was almost certain what to do next. After thinking about everything, Luoya turned his attention back to Wilhelmina. No, I'm also AI Lizzie's friend, so it's my duty to do this. Luoya, what do you plan to do next? Roja's face was serious and firm, and hearing this, Wilhelmina nodded. Mina? Please bring me along. Although my strength can't be compared to yours, if it's just to share some of the pressure. Facing Wilhelmina's self-deprecating words, Luoya immediately refuted with a serious expression, and that was the truth. With Wilhelmina's help, Luoya's pressure would definitely be reduced, and hearing his evaluation, Wilhelmina's expression also brightened. Sorry, Mina, although you're strong, I want to go alone this time. Wilhelmina widened her eyes, and after a moment of silence, she couldn't help but ask. Hearing Luoya's words, Luoya stood up and walked to Wilhelmina. AI Lizzie is indeed someone important to me, but Mina, you're also important. This time, the situation might be dangerous, and if I put you in danger just to save her, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? If it's a war, let's not talk about it for now. This is my personal mission, and it's not a situation where you have to risk your life. The worried Wilhelmina clenched her fists, hoping to change Luoya's mind, but she didn't expect that after hearing her words, the black-haired young man shook his head. Looking at the young lady in front of him, the black-haired young man gazed at the moonlight by the window, and after a moment of silence, he said, "It might be safest if I'm alone." Chapter 6:14. In the middle of the night, the black-haired boy hugged the girl as he looked at the moonlight by the window and pondered. On the other side, Wilhelmina frowned after hearing Luoya's words. That's exactly what it means. The Akate family's ancestors had passed down many generations of history. If it was something that could affect reality, then the relationship between the Mother Goddess and Luoya would be very complicated. In order to not provoke the Mother Goddess, Luoya could only save AI Lizzie by himself. On the other hand, Luoya, who understood the power of the Mother Goddess, also understood that in front of her, numbers were meaningless. If she really wanted to kill Luoya, then Wilhelmina would only die with him. Is it because the mother goddess is too powerful? There was nothing wrong with taking care of him as her own child, but in reality, Luoya was the child of the mother goddess in a sense, and his current body and Shiya's transformation ability were all obtained with the help of the mother goddess. The revival of the mother goddess was one of the prophecies, and also one of the factors that led to the destruction of humanity. To the human race, the mother goddess was an inevitable enemy. Luoya's attitude wasn't appropriate, and he was prepared to disappoint Wilhelmina. However, to his surprise, the girl didn't say anything after hearing his thoughts. After listening to Roja's words, the gray-blue-haired girl nodded her head. Her face gradually calmed down. Roja stared at her strangely as he was puzzled in his heart. The black-haired boy's expression became strange, and the reason was simple. Luoya originally expected Wilhelmina to be the one who couldn't accept Luoya's attitude. After all, Wilhelmina was the successor of the Twilight Sage Association, and she was also the one with the most unyielding attitude. Under such circumstances, the girl with a serious personality shouldn't be able to accept this kind of wishful thinking, and even somewhat naive thinking. But why was her reaction so calm? Wilhelmina, you agree with me? Hearing Wilhelmina's words, Luoya frowned and naturally thought of the girl's old habit. Luoya naturally didn't want to see such a situation, and he had seriously discussed it with Wilhelmina several times, but it seemed that this deep-rooted thought didn't change. For some reason, Wilhelmina lowered her head, and her face was flushed, completely different from the expression when she called herself a tool in the past. After a moment of shyness, the girl spoke again. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.